Hello, online class and in-person class. Y'all count too. I'm going to do a quick lecture today. This PowerPoint is for, what conditions are required for life? Is for both today's assignment and tomorrow's assignment. So today's assignment is only like 9 questions. Tomorrow's assignment, I think, if I remember correctly, is like around 20 questions. And this PowerPoint's not very long. It's 11 slides. So I'm going to go through these pretty quick. And y'all are familiar with both of these topics. So we're just going to do one lecture. You'll have plenty of time at the end of the lecture to answer the questions. Everybody close your Chromebooks. Except for the people at home, you need the Chromebook open to see the video. There's actually 8 questions because third period found one that wasn't very good, so I deleted it. So there's 8 questions today and close to 20 questions tomorrow, and you'll have the whole class period to do the assignment tomorrow. So that should work out pretty well. So today what we're doing, let me go back to the first page and not the last page. We're talking about the definition of science still. This is just the first, this is the second section in the first chapter. And what we're talking about today is the scientific method, which, to be fair, we've already talked about this here. I just want to go over it again before the assignment. And then tomorrow's assignment will be on the tools of science, which I think most of y'all have down pretty well. So we're going to go through those 2 slides pretty quickly. So first slide, they talk about the scientific method being an established set of principles that scientists use as a logical, organized method of study. They show you their scientific method here, which I don't really like for a couple reasons. First, it's linear, and the scientific method really isn't linear. You got to have at least one loop to kind of show how you redo your hypothesis and try your experiment again. And that being said, I also don't like the steps that they use. They even started on the other slide set with your observation. And so I think observation should always be the first step. What I'd like to show you real quick is on Google. I must have closed out the slide. If you go and open a new tab and you search for the scientific method on Google, so scientific method, I'm not going to do a DuckDuckGo search, I'm going to do a Google search, and I'm going to look at Google Images, and we're going to look at some of these. You can see that they're all very different. They will use different words for each step. They'll have different numbers of steps. This one has like 8 steps. This one has 6. This one has a whole bunch of steps, including several loops. This one's like a pyramid. If you go down here, there's a couple circles. So like a circular scientific method. So there's lots of different ways that people represent this. You probably had a teacher kind of do this differently. And if you continue on through different science classes, you'll have another teacher do it differently. Just know in general, no matter what the steps are or how many steps or kind of what form they take, we're all kind of doing the same thing. We might call it by different names, but it doesn't matter where you go in the world. It's all kind of the same process, and there are some important parts to it. So back to the PowerPoint. They have started with define a problem. I think what we're talking about here is making an observation and asking a question about that observation. That is defining your problem. Second step, gather background information. This you really only have to do if you turn around and watch. If you are doing actual science, if you're doing like a normal everyday scientific process thing, usually your information is already gathered. Like if you use my example of I go outside in the morning and my car doesn't start, you know whether you put gas in it or not. You know whether the low oil light has been on or the check engine light, or whether you drove home with a flat tire yesterday, which wouldn't make your car not start, but you know what I mean. You usually have information that's already been gathered that you can pull from. Next, you develop your hypothesis. You make a guess about what could be causing your problem. Then you perform an experiment to see if your hypothesis is correct. If your experiment works, then you can move forward. If it doesn't, you have to go back and do another hypothesis. You collect data from your experiment, make some observations, and if it works out well, you draw your conclusion. Conclusion should always be down here at the end. So what they want to know about scientific method, they want you to know it needs to be consistent. You need to be doing the same kind of steps every single time, no matter whether you're in chemistry class or physics class or biology, or you're at home trying to figure out why your car doesn't start. It needs to be universally understood. So you need to be able to explain your steps and your technology that you've used in a way that someone who's reading your paper can understand and they can recreate. And that's the repeatable part. You need to be able to repeat it, and other people all around the world need to be able to read your paper and do exactly what you did and hopefully get the exact same results. On the universally understood part, right now, a lot of scientific papers, most scientific papers are written in English, even if the person's first language isn't English. Know that hasn't always been the case. And I might have mentioned this in a previous class. 60 years ago, 100 years ago, almost all scientific papers were written in German because Germany was like the center of the scientific world. They had all the best scientists doing the new work. If you go 60 to 100 years in the future, maybe it's not English. Maybe it's written in Chinese or some other Asian language. And so we have to work hard at making sure that we're doing meaningful science, writing it in a way that everybody can understand, so they kind of have an incentive to write their papers in English so we can understand the work that they're doing. If we stop doing meaningful work, they're going to stop writing their papers in English, and we're going to have to translate from Chinese, which if you've ever had to translate from Chinese in Google Translate, doesn't work out so good all the time. And so you might have to have someone who can actually read Chinese tell you exactly what it means. So the scientific method is not necessarily a linear path. Like I said, you should have some cycles and some repeating steps, which is why the images that we saw look so different. And there's a lot that do have those cycles and repeating steps. So step one, define a problem. And I'm going to say step one is you need to make an observation. In order to find a problem, you have to see it, feel it, touch it. You have to have some sort of input of data where you know that there's a problem there. Step two, ask your questions. Why? Why am I having this problem? What is causing my problem? How did I get to this point where I come out in the morning and I'm late for work and my car doesn't start? These are the questions that are going to help you form your hypothesis. Conduct background or relevant background research. If we're talking about a chemistry thing, you don't know much about chemistry. You've had a little bit of chemistry in your previous sciences, but not a lot. We're in like the first 3 weeks of the semester, and we haven't even really talked about chemistry that much. We've just talked about science. You'll probably need to do some background research. If we're talking about your job or your car or your bank account, you might have enough information to just go ahead and do a hypothesis. You might be like, I don't have any money in my bank account because I wrote a big check to the insurance company last week, or I had to pay my car payment. You already have that information with you. So draw on the knowledge of the scientific community, use what other people have done, read some papers, read some articles, ask your teacher or a friend, or draw on your own knowledge that you already have, and help to develop a better hypothesis. You want to make an educated guess, not just a general guess, but in order to have it be an educated guess, you have to use some sort of knowledge that you already have or that you got from someone else. And it can vary from reading formal reports to collecting data and observations. I kind of said that. Do some research, read some scientific articles, watch a YouTube video, whatever you need to do, get your research done. So next up, create your hypothesis. Make your educated guess as to what your problem is and how it can be fixed. It needs to be the best answer to your question, not just a answer, not just a random guess, but the best one that you can come up with. Sometimes you come up with multiple ones, and you really got to work to figure out which one's the best one. A hypothesis is a possible and testable explanation based on an educated guess. It needs to be realistic. You don't want to guess things that just really aren't going to happen, and you need to be able to test it. If you can't test it, you can't really prove yourself right. This is kind of important. They want your hypothesis, and I want your hypothesis in the if-then statement. And so you need to put it with these ifs and thens. So like for your car, if my car is not starting because it's out of gas, then it should start when I fill it up with gas, right? That's my hypothesis. That's testable. It's something that I can do. It's realistic. They give an example. What is the effect of studying time on exam grades? We all kind of know this answer, right? The more you study, the better you're going to do at exams. Everybody make sure you're awake and your heads are up. So possible testable hypothesis, if the amount of studying time for an exam is increased, then the grade received on the exam will increase. Is this necessarily the best hypothesis? Is this always true? No. And there's a lot of things that would prevent you from testing this. Like, let's say I assign 2 hours of study time to half the class, and I assign 0 hours of study time to the other half of the class. Are there going to be people who still get good grades in the half that didn't study? Yeah. All of you are different. You have different knowledge bases. We all know that sometimes people are good at taking tests. Sometimes people are bad at taking tests. Even if you know every answer and you've studied it a bunch, when you get to the test and you read the question, your mind just freaks out and you can't figure out the right answer. Where there's other people who they don't even have to know anything. They can just kind of see how the question's formatted and know, oh, well, these two aren't going to work, so I got a 50-50 shot at these other two questions. It's not necessarily the best example, but it's what they get. So using an if-then statement highlights its cause and effect. The cause would be you studied more. The effect would be you got better grades because you studied more. Designing and performing an experiment that supports or rejects your hypothesis. Remember, you have to have this option. If you design an experiment that can only succeed and only show that your hypothesis is correct, that's not a good experiment. There has to be a chance for you to fail. You need to select appropriate equipment and technology. This part is important. It needs to be available and accessible. If you use a piece of equipment that you built yourself and no one else has, and they can't buy at a store or from a supplier, they can't verify whether you did your science correctly. You're just experimenting all by yourself. So you need to use things like microscopes or computers or a program that's easily accessible where people can actually verify your experiment. It may need to be modified based on equipment availability. Consider all the necessary items down to the smallest little thing. If I'm using like a scalpel to cut open a plant or something, I got to make sure that it's something that everybody else can have. They should provide meaningful data. You obviously want to do meaningful data. The last thing you want is for you to do all this work, write a paper, and nobody ever reads it ever. What the best thing to happen is if you write a paper and other people call you and they're like, hey, I want to use your paper. I want to cite you in my paper as I do my scientific work. That's like the goal of science. So you want to collect accurate, precise, and unbiased data in anything in life, no matter whether we're talking about science or just how you treat people you meet on the street. If you're not aware that you're probably being biased, then you're being biased. Unless you actively try to not be biased, you're going to be biased. And what I mean by that is, when I do an experiment, do I want to succeed? Yeah, I want to be right. I want to prove my hypothesis correct. And so unless I try to be unbiased, more than likely I'm going to design an experiment that is going to prove me correct. It's going to work out because that's what I want to happen. And so I have to really work hard at being unbiased and make an experiment that could fail to make sure that I'm actually doing myself justice. Because other people that come behind me are going to try to make me fail. So I need to make sure that I do the right job myself. Perform multiple trials. Sometimes, I don't know if it's going to go to the next page. Uh-oh. My board cut out. And we're back. Or not. I might have to use the keyboard. Sometimes your multiple trials, you will find outliers, things that don't really make sense. Like you do it 100 times, and 99 of the times you get the same answer, but one time you get a really weird answer. Sometimes those are even more important than the other 99. You've just found something that's kind of weird and really needs to be explained. So consider the reliability of your data. Did you do a good job? Did you do all the things necessary to make sure that you were right? Draw conclusions that support or refute your hypothesis. Make sure you fail. If you did an experiment and it didn't come out like you thought, write up your paper anyways and be like, hey, I thought this was going to happen. It didn't happen this way. Everything that I thought was actually wrong. That could be very important science as well. Someone could come behind you and discover something new and important. All right, now we get to the tools. I'm going to go through these pretty quick because you're familiar with most of them. And this will be for tomorrow's assignment. We all know what calculators are. Does everybody know what spreadsheets are? like Excel sheets or Google Docs, not Google Docs, Google Sheets is what it's called. Basically, it's a big grid of squares where you can input numbers or words and kind of organize everything. And the most important thing is you can put in math equations and do a whole bunch of math all at once. So if you're doing like a bunch of adding, you can add like hundreds or thousands of numbers with just one little keystroke and one little mouse move. Spreadsheets are pretty cool. Data collecting probes. This is actually a new thing. pH meters, temperatures, scales. They have scientific equipment. We don't have it because we don't have that much money, but they have scientific equipment that will record all this for you and put it right into a spreadsheet. So you don't have to write down the temperature every 5 minutes. The probe does it for you and just makes a nice little spreadsheet for you to look at your data. We all know what computers are and laboratory glassware and safety goggles. And then you get to metric rulers, and I'll go ahead and mention Celsius thermometers. We want to use metric and Celsius because that's what everybody else uses. If you're writing in inches and miles and feet, people aren't likely to look at your science because they're going to have to do work just to read it. You want to write in Celsius, you want to write in metric, so the rest of the world can appreciate what you're doing and not have homework to kind of convert all this stuff. And because it's better, it's easier to do the math with. Electronic balances, if you've ever had to use a triple beam balance, they're terrible. Like, it takes a long time, you make a lot of mistakes, and usually you get a weight that's not necessarily the greatest. So if you have an electronic balance, it's better. Be accurate on these. We do have electronic balances. If it tells you 5.001 grams, write down the 0.001. Don't just round it off to 5. That 1 means something, and it may not seem like it now, but when you get to the end, it could be the difference between a perfectly correct number and one that's kind of off. Hot plates, it's what it sounds like. It's a flat, like stove kind of surface. These are better than Bunsen burners because in a Bunsen burner, your flame can like blow around. If the air comes on and it's blowing over there at the table like it always is, it blows your flame off to the side and it doesn't really get heated right. And it's really hard to control how hot a flame is. If you want a specific temperature like 450 degrees, it's hard to get that with a flame and keep it that way. With a hot plate, you turn it to 450 degrees. It stays there for as long as you need it. You want to take good notes, so make sure you have a notebook or a journal, or in the case where we do labs, go ahead and turn it off. It's all right. In the case where we do labs, make sure you're taking notes on your lab paper and not just like looking at it and trying to remember it. You want to write everything down. And then timing devices. My example for this is, if you do an experiment and it takes an hour for the reaction to complete, you need to write that down because if someone comes behind you and they don't know that, they might spend 30 minutes waiting on it to go, and then it doesn't go, and they're like, they were wrong. This science is bad. And they write a paper about how bad you are. And turns out they just didn't wait long enough because you didn't tell them it took an hour. So you need to write down your times and make sure you're recording times accurately. And that's it. So yeah, it's long sometimes, but it's not too long. We have what? We got another 20-something minutes. So 8 questions in 20 minutes. You can do it. If you have questions, let me know. I'm turning the lights on. It is assigned. Online people, if you have questions, please let me know. And remember to like and subscribe.